Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 10 brawlers that are way better than you actually think. They're incredibly underrated, and a lot of these I've been pushing out consistently ever since they got some buffs. I just think some of these are really strong. You should not be sleeping on them. So, starting off with one of my favorite picks in the game right now on Power League. Even though I'm not really the best with him, it is Colt. I think he's incredibly underrated. Of course, there's some skill gap to him, but I think right now, with his pretty much unlimited reload speed, he's just such a strong pick in a few particular game modes and maps. So, of course, Heist is going to be the best game mode for him. I think there's only one brawler better than him in Heist right now, and that's Colette. And that's just saying something because there's a bunch of base race brawlers right now. But Colt's just insane with the speed loader gadget as well. You're able just to consistently reload non-stop. And, of course, you eventually is going to start hitting some shots, right? Even if you're pretty trash. So, Heist, absolute S tier. Brawl, he's a very strong option as well. Winter Party can easily just consistently keep spraying down the lane and no one's going to sneak up on him, and he does a lot of damage. Backyard, I've seen him used a lot. Triple loads as well, and you'll be surprised. In gem grab, I see him quite a few times as well on maps like Last Stop and Open Space. He's a really consistent lane. So for me, Colt, he's sneakily towards the A tier. Of course, it really doesn't matter whether you yourself can hit those shots. So next up on the underrated list, we have Janet. So she's a brawler which I underrate personally a lot. I forget about her, but she's actually a pretty strong, consistent brawler right now. She's flown in and around the B tier, which again, she's not like OP, but she's a very solid pick against a lot of meta brawlers right now. So some of the top brawlers in the game, she can counter, or just on specific grassy maps. She's a really good shutdown brawler to Charlie right now, and Charlie's S tier top 5 brawler. So Janet, just in principle, is going to get stronger as well because she's a good counter. And again, she's just a good counter to pretty much any sneaky brawler on a map. You know, looking at any gem grab map with any grass, she's pretty good there. Maps like Winter Party, she can just really good at zoning people out with the vision gear. I think she's incredibly underrated, and you pretty much use her in every single game mode except for Heist. So next up, a brawler which I think everyone should know how strong they are, but still, I see no one ban them in Power League. It is Amber. So Amber for me is the go-to ban because she's insane everywhere. She's super versatile. She's got 2 really good gadgets. Even though Dancing Flames used to be a meme, it's actually one of the best gadgets in the game right now, and you just delete people with it. So again, I'm taking a look at pretty much every single game mode. You pretty much even use her sometimes in Knockout and Bounty as well. She's a go-to option because once you lock onto a brawler, pretty much every brawler in the game, you just absolutely shred them. They face no choice but to literally die because she just does crazy damage. The damage buff was way too much, just like the Bow one. But Bow, everybody talks about him because a lot of NPCs play him in Power League. But Amber, she's always slept on. But for me, it has to be an S tier brawler, literally easily. So good across. On the underrated list, we have Rico. So there's obviously a little bit of bias going towards this because Rico is one of my favorite brawlers. But I think a good Rico player can absolutely carry even in the toughest matchups. So the good thing about Rico is that he has a really good, I'd say, balanced build. Like, you can switch between both gadgets, both star powers, and you can have some decent success rate depending on what composition you're facing off against. But always his best build is going to be ones that just rip through tanks and just any brawler. So super bouncy with multiple launcher as well. You can just rip through people. And also with the reload gear and the vision gear on grassy maps, you're just going to keep on top of opponents really easily. So the best maps for him: Triple Dribble, Winter Party. He's insane on these maps. Triple Dribble in particular, you're just able to shred through people on that open lane, or just consistently everywhere. Even up against throwers, you can have a decent matchup on Triple Dribble. On gem grab ups like Stay in Your Lane, again, bushy map, Rico's going to be underrated there. The Great Divide, he's like an S tier pick on that map because he's able to consistently pinch lanes and keep control of the mid grass. And he's always been underrated in some other scenarios as well, like Tornado Ring, Bell's Rock, and even maps like Layer Bake. Rico can be pretty underrated. So for me, he's always slept on, but he does a crazy amount of damage. Next up on the underrated list, we have 8-Bit. So I kind of forgot for at least a month that 8-Bit kind of existed in this meta. I know there are some good hard counters to him at the top of the meta, like Colette and Bow. But if you're on a map where they're not really consistent, or you just ban one of those brawlers, 8-Bit can always be a strong pick. So the reason why I'm using him a lot more recently is because he's a great counter to some of the meta brawlers in Knockout and Bounty. Because if you get the lead with 8-Bit, especially with boosted booster, and you could just camp in spawn, you pair that with any sharpshooter, literally, can even be Bell, you're able to deal so much damage, and the opponents will find it's so tough to regain the lead because you've got that 8-bit turret. And the main brawler I use it to counter against is Leon. Leon, of course, being one of the best brawlers in the game easily right now. It's just so hard for Leon to get a kill. If all people or all of your teammates are just grouped up on the 8-bit turret, you're just going to shred him as soon as you see him. So I find 8-bit actually a lot better now in knockout and bounty rather than heist, gem grab, because he's starting to fall out of those metas. So for me, 8-bit, he's underrated. He's just in a different niche now. Next up on the underrated list, so you might think I'm trolling straight the way here, but I think it's Hank. So hear me out. Hank, he is an F-tier brawler, so of course he's only going to work in a few scenarios, as do a lot of F-tier or D-tier brawlers do. But I feel like my success rate with Hank is actually really high. And I don't even think I'm that good of a Hank. But on certain maps and some scenarios, Hank can actually be so controlling and so hard to deal with. Again, I've had it in Power League where so many people just pick Hank on the enemy team, and he actually is a lot harder to face off against than I give credit for. So, in particular, Brawl, he's able to suffocate so easily. Think of the Brawl maps. Backyard Bowl is actually one of the most open maps, but it's one of my favorite one of my favorite maps with him, because you're able just to suffocate people behind that wall so easily and get the spawn trap going. Triple as well. It's all about pushing the opponents back and starting a spawn trap, and it's all about getting the control of the map. Bells rock as well. If I face a couple of sharpshooters or squishy brawlers, and Hank's just gonna have a field day. So gotta bear it with a pinch of salt. You can't just be playing him everywhere, but in the right matchup, I think Hank can secretly be really strong and oppressive. Next up on the underrated list, we have Otis. So I feel like for the longest time, Otis has always been underappreciated. It may be because he has pretty boring mechanics. It may be because other brawlers are just more flashier and have that hypercharge to counter tanks better. But I think Otis is in the spot where, again, he counters some of the meta brawlers and people just don't appreciate him enough. So I'm starting to go Otis a lot more. Again, on the non-generic game modes, typically you go Otis on like Brawl gem grab, but I'm starting to go him a lot more on like knockout and bounty, because again, brawlers like Leon, Otis is such a good shutdown because you've got the fat splatter gadget to remove the Leon lollipop drop, and then you've also just got the super, which is able to somewhat be a soft counter to hypercharge, because if you connect it onto them straight away, they've only maybe got a 1 second, 2 seconds to actually use their hypercharge instead of the full 5 seconds. So that's a good shutdown as well for Otis. He does struggle sometimes because he hasn't got the damage to really keep up with the meta, but I still, again, think he's underappreciated. There are a few maps as well he's able to consistently keep lane easily. You know, any map with grass, the vision gear with him is so underrated. So for me, people are always sleeping on Otis. So the next underrated brawler is going to be Meg. So I always pick Meg, maybe a little bit too much when it comes down to Power League, but I think she's in a really good spot right now, especially at countering those meta brawlers. So of course, knockout and bounty is going to be the best game modes to play her in, because you see a lot of Piper, you see a lot of Nanny, you see a lot of Belle, etc, etc, and Meg is the best counter to them. So there are some people that think the opposite, which is just nonsense, because pro players appreciate that Meg is such a good counter pick, because snipers are just going to take forever to take Meg down. Even if they get her out of mech, which will take 2-3 shots itself, then they're going to kill her in small form, and then they've got to actually waste an ammo on the toolbox gadget as well. So she could be tanking 5-6 shots, and by that time you're able to get so much presence on the map, whether it be in gem grab, collecting gems and pushing the enemy gem carry back, whether that's knockout, forcing the opponents back into spawn like in out in the open. So just her pure beefiness is able just to dominate so many settings. So next up on the underrated list, again, we have Lola. So there's always a few brawlers that kind of circle around, like Lola, Otis, Palmer, etc. But again, Lola is just starting to become a little bit stronger because she's a good shutdown to some of the meta brawlers, and she still does insane damage in the right settings. So for me, she's going to be stronger on scenarios on hot zone, for example. So ring of fire, open zone, I've seen a lot more Lola because she's a great shutdown to Leon, because she can tank so much with her gadget and her clone, and she's also just able to get a lot of zone time in hot zone. Again, heist, she's a really good brawler because the meta is so base race right now. So if the opponents are taking like Colt, Brock, then Lola can be a good alternative because she's able to focus onto the safe so much and get so much damage. Again, she's actually a good counter, I would say, to some of the snipers as well. You might not think it, but because you've got the clone and just Lola's actually a decent amount of HP, she can be somewhat of a good counter to those brawlers if you're a good Lola, of course. So she'll always be underrated, and of course with the vision gear as well, I think it's her best build. So using her on maps which are pretty grassy, you're going to get a lot of success out of Lola. Okay, moving on to the final underrated brawler, we have Gale. So I'll say he's falling out of meta a little bit because the maps don't favor him so much on ladder. But when you're looking at Power League maps, he actually is really consistent across the board. Again, he's just a pretty boring player, so people just kind of forget about him. But you take a look back a couple of months to the World Finals, and he was one of the most picked brawlers because he's just so good at countering those hypercharge brawlers. He's got the slowdown effect with his star power as well with every single shot. And that's vital, right? If it's a Jackie hypercharge running at you, you connect a few shots, and then by that time you cycle your super, you can just push the Jackie all the way back, and then that's it. That's their hypercharge completely gone. So just literally his star power can just stop so many pushes. Again, Brawl, he's going to be really good. He's going to be really good at maps like Open Space, Last Stop. And again, it kind of actually matters on how good the player is. Because with Gale, he hasn't got the most flashy or the biggest amount of damage with his main attack. But if you can get into a good position and press your enemies back, then it's going to be really hard for them to get out of a spawn trap with Gale. Because it's just so easy to lock down a lane because, of course, his main attack is literally the length of a bush, for example. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know who's underrated in your opinion. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.